Hello, today I'm going to be talking about some concepts from Chapter 4 of Maxfield and Babbie. Specifically, I'll be discussing causality with respect to nomothetic explanations. So, remember in past discussions we talked about causality and cause and effect relationships. Okay, so for example, we know that when people have delinquent friends, they're a lot more likely to engage in delinquency themselves. Okay, this is straight up social learning theory. So we should see a correlation between people who have friends that smoke marijuana and self reported marijuana use. And let's just say that we're trying to model this for the purpose of a research study. Remember, a lot of criminal justice and criminological research is about modeling cause and effect relationships. So if we're going to model this relationship, we'd probably look to theory for some guidance. And really, this is straight up social learning theory. So social learning theory suggests that if we have friends that engage in delinquent or illegal behavior, then a person is a lot more likely to engage in that behavior themselves. So we could apply the theory to this situation, and we could argue that as people have friends that smoke marijuana, they're a lot more likely to smoke marijuana themselves. So if I wanted to test this relationship with my students, one thing that I could do is I could send out a survey to all of my students. Let's say I disseminate a survey to all of my research method students, and I ask them to self-report the number of friends that they have that smoke marijuana, and I also ask them to tell me how many times in the last month they themselves have gotten high. Okay, so the independent variable in this case would be the number of delinquent peers. Remember, we talked about independent dependent variable relationships and the fact that the independent variable is always the cause, and then the dependent variable we're trying to measure is always the effect. So the independent variable in this case would be the number of delinquent peers. The dependent variable would be self-reported marijuana use, so the number of times someone got high over the last month. So what I'm arguing is that there is a relationship between my independent variable of delinquent peers and my dependent variable of self-reported marijuana use. Okay, and I'm trying to demonstrate this in my study. So I go out, I collect some survey data from my students. Now, how exactly do I demonstrate that this relationship exists? Well, there's three criteria for causality and nomothetic explanations. So first I have to show that the two variables, the independent and dependent variable, are correlated and that they vary together. So I have to document that relationship. The second criterion is that the cause must occur in time before the effect. So I have to show that the independent variable is introduced before we see change in the dependent variable. And finally, I have to show that the relationship that I'm modeling is true and that any change in the dependent variable is due to the independent variable and not due to other external causes or external variables. And sometimes these are called confounding. Okay, so to go over this in a little bit more detail and hopefully make it a little more clear, we'll look at the elements piece by piece. So the first element, our independent variable and our dependent variable, they have to covary. There has to be correlation. So what I would do is I would take those survey results that I have from the students and I'd run some statistical analyses on them. And most likely I would be able to find a correlation between people having delinquent peers and self-reported marijuana use. So in other words, I would see that as the number of friends who are marijuana users go up, I'm probably going to see an increase in self-reported use as well. Now, this is not surprising. It's nothing new. It's nothing groundbreaking. Again, this is straight up social learning theory. This has been demonstrated time and time again. But I guarantee that I would see that relationship if I were to actually do this study in real life. So again, as our independent variable increases, number of friends smoking marijuana increases, we're going to see increases also in our dependent variable of self-reported marijuana use. Okay. Again, this is very easy to document. This is called correlation. Okay. You may be familiar with that saying, correlation does not mean causation. All right. This is just all this is. This is correlation. It's not sufficient to make a causal argument on its own. And usually in criminal justice research, this is the best we can do. Most studies are correlational in that they document the correlational aspect of the relationship, but they don't hit the other two criterion for nomothetic causality, which I'll talk about next. So remember, the second criterion is that the cause must occur in time before the effect. Okay, and this just makes logical sense if you think about it. So the cause has to happen before we see a change. The problem with documenting this is that it's very difficult to know for sure what came first. So again, we'll look at the marijuana example. If students self-report that they smoke marijuana, how do we know that they had friends that did it first? Okay, we can't document that with any guarantee. We can't show that and be confident that that's true every single time. Some people might have started smoking marijuana on their own, and then they met other people who did it as well, and they became friends, and then they did it together, okay? So the reverse happened. Or we could see situations where people never smoked weed, then they met people who did it, and then they started doing it themselves. And so again, straight up social learning theory, great for what we're trying to document, but it's very difficult to tease that out and figure out exactly what came first. Okay, so usually in criminal justice and criminology research, we have difficulty demonstrating this. Sometimes it's easy. Let's say I'm arguing that gender influences behavior. So we know that men are a lot more likely to engage in delinquent behaviors than women, and this is just a general theory. So I could argue that males are more likely to self-report marijuana use than females. And I could demonstrate this on my survey. And obviously, time order is no longer an issue here because what came first, gender assignment or marijuana use? Obviously, gender assignment comes first. And so in this case, I can demonstrate that the cause occurred before the effect. But if I'm trying to measure other things like what came first, delinquent peers or a person using marijuana on their own, that's very difficult to tease that out. And so a lot of times we can't make an argument for causal order. So the third criterion for nomothetic causality is that the relationship is not due to confounding. It's not due to some outside extraneous influence that I'm not measuring in my study. So remember, I'm arguing that people are going to smoke marijuana because they have friends that do it. I'm modeling social learning theory here, okay? However, there is a whole universe of alternate explanations for why people smoke marijuana, right? And this is our whole universe of criminological theory, all right? And theories of delinquency. So maybe marijuana use is because of stress. Maybe people feel stress, they feel strain. So to alleviate that stress, they smoke marijuana. So that's a straight up theory, straight up explanation from general strain theory. All right. Maybe people smoke marijuana because they have poor bond connections with pro-social institutions. So maybe poor bonds to their parents, poor bonds to school, poor bonds to work. So they don't have tight bonds, so therefore they're going to engage in delinquent behavior like smoking marijuana. That is straight up social control. Maybe people have poor self-control and they can't help themselves, and so they engage in delinquency like smoking marijuana. That is the general theory of crime. So the problem is that in my study of social learning theory, I can't possibly account for all the other possible reasons that someone might smoke marijuana. So I can demonstrate that there's correlation. I probably can't demonstrate time order, and I probably can't demonstrate that the relationship that I'm documenting isn't due to some outside influence. And so that's the problem. And as I joke with my colleagues sometimes, I say that's why we can't have nice things. That's why we're not respected as actual researchers, because really we're doing a poor job of documenting causal relationships because we're only hitting one of the criterion for causality. So again, that's pretty much it. That wraps it up for causality and nomothetic explanations. Remember, whenever you're documenting a cause and effect relationship between an independent variable and a dependent variable, you want to show those three elements if you can. Okay, so you want to show correlation between the independent and dependent variable. You want to show that the independent variable occurs in time before the dependent variable, and you want to show that that relationship is not due to extraneous causes. So again, with the example that we just walked through, if I'm trying to show that delinquent peers leads to increase in self-reported marijuana use, we want to show that there is a correlation between having delinquent peers and self-reported marijuana use in the first place. We want to show that the delinquent peers came in time before self-reported marijuana use, and we want to show that marijuana use is not due to outside relationships. Okay, and again, very hard to demonstrate the last two criterion for causality, but a little bit easier to demonstrate the first one in terms of a correlational relationship. But correlation is not causation. Okay, so if you have any questions about this, please feel free to shoot me an email and I would be happy to address them.